Many Goldsmiths academics can lay claim to having invented a concept. On closer inspection, those concepts turn out to be fairly obscure, recognised by a small number of aficionados in a specialised area of work. Keith Hart's invention is the real thing. The term informal economy has entered the everyday language and is used not only by economists and anthropologists, but now by politicians and journalists and people at dinner. It's one of those terms, informal economy, that makes us wonder how we cope without it. And informal economy is a term that Keith coined. It emerged as a challenge to thinking in economics and beyond economics in the 1960s and 1970s, when the modernisation of economies had once seemed very straightforward, particularly to economists, but then to a lot of other people as well. Traditional forms of work, traditional forms of production would over time disappear as economic progress and modernisation advanced in the developing world. But in reality, it became clear that that seemed not to be happening. Was it a failure of modernisation, or was it, more probably, a failure of modernisation theory? Either way, the result was a renewed interest in the traditional economic sector, which refused to disappear in the way that modernisation theory had assumed. And it was in that context that Keith Hart devised a new term, the informal economy, in his work on Ghana in the early 1970s. Some concepts serve to throw obscurity over future work. Others sharpen and clarify it. Keith's placing of informal economy into the academic and wider language helped create a whole new field of study. Of course he didn't do it alone, but a discursive breakthrough of that kind can be fundamental, as it was in this case. And the term has become a standard category now in development studies, one routinely used in policy, political and analytical work. I've dwelled on Keith's impact on work on traditional economists, not because it's his sole claim to fame, or even his primary claim to fame, but because it does signal something very special about him, a characteristic in his career ever since, and that is the determination to invent and reinvent ideas, to make people think afresh, to question and challenge conventional wisdom. And that's why he's ranged so very widely in his writings. He's written on the Caribbean writer and revolutionary C.L.R. James. He's written on the internet. He's written on intellectual property. And recently on money. His book, The Memory Bank, Money in an Unequal World, was published in 2000. And then came The Hitman's Dilemma, which appeared in 2005. As the publisher's blurb describes the hitman's dilemma, it's not personal, it's just business, says the professional killer to his victim. And it goes on to say that the author ultimately asks, what place is there for the humanity of individual persons in the dehumanized social and economic frameworks we live within? This, he says, is the hitman's dilemma, and it's ours as well. Prickly Pear pamphlets came from the same desire to be provocative, to make people think again, to make people think differently. Prickly Pear pamphlets were founded in 1993 by Keith Hart and Anna Grimshaw, inspired by the 18th century figure of the pamphleteer, whose new and provocative ideas circulated as widely as possible. They said, we emulate the passionate amateurs of history who circulated new and radical ideas to as wide an audience as possible. And, they went on, we hope in the process to reinvent anthropology as a means of engaging with society. You'll have already got a clear sense of Keith Hart's capacity to innovate, to ask challenging questions, to range widely, to think creatively and shake up those around him, and to communicate those ideas to a wider audience. He's done that in his many books, such as The Political Economy of West African Agriculture, published in 1982, and in the more recent books that I've just referred to. He's done so in his dozens of articles and book chapters that have ranged across a diverse set of topics. And he's been concerned to communicate all of that to a much wider public. All of which, it seems to me, makes it obvious why Keith ended up here at Goldsmiths. The surprise is that he took so long to get here. He's had a glittering career, not conventionally spending it in just 2 or 3 universities, but moving widely between institutions. He spent a good number of years in Cambridge in the 1980s and the 1990s. including as director of the African Studies Centre between 1992 and 1998. And while there, he was the first person to win the university's then new teaching prize for the humanities and social sciences. I think no one at Goldsmiths is surprised at that, because Keith is an outstanding teacher, always able to present the bigger picture, setting whatever he is teaching within much wider patterns of Western intellectual history, of social theory, global trends, politics, and the future of anthropology, about which he cares a lot. And all, I'm told, in often improvised lectures to captivate his students. Those teaching skills derive from the same characteristics that make him such a superb PhD supervisor and such a supportive and constructive mentor of younger colleagues. Well, after a fairly long stay in Cambridge, Keith began a period of travel, moving between institutions that he could influence and where he could do the work he wanted to do. And he was in great demand around the academic and wider world. Since 1998, before arriving at Goldsmiths, he's worked at the universities of Pavia, Stellenbosch, Chicago, Oslo, Northwestern, and Aberdeen, as well as at the ILO. And in the last 5 or 6 years, he has lectured in 34 cities worldwide, from New York to Pretoria, from Goa to Oslo, from Sao Paulo to Berkeley. And he joined Goldsmiths in 2004. The obvious place for someone of his intellectual imagination and of his willingness to think afresh about standard subjects and to invent new ones. He came as a half-time post, from which he was made professor last year. A half-time post which enables Keith to continue to live part of every week in Paris, in Rue du Faubourg Poissonnière, in the 9th arrondissement, a place where the informal economy certainly once flourished, though it's probably come up since those days. But of course, Keith was really a professor when he arrived here. Maybe we only made him a professor last year, but he was really a professor when he arrived here 3 years ago. His distinction made that obvious, as did his huge number of publications, as did the range of subjects on which his intellectual curiosity alighted, as did his ability to inspire colleagues and students alike. And Goldsmiths quite rightly recognised the fact last year and gave him the title of professor. I'm delighted, therefore, to invite Professor Keith Hart to deliver his inaugural lecture, Money in the Making of World Society. Keith.